I'm with Matt Kettmann, the senior writer at the Santa Barbara Independent, and I was curious on his thoughts on Pierre LaFond. Matt is a critic and reviews and reports on wines from the Central Coast, South Coast of California for Wine Enthusiast Magazine. He's the writer at large. Hey, Matt, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Jeremiah. Happy to be
I
here.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. I instantly thought of you first when I thought about this tribute to Pierre Lafond and just talking to different winemakers and hearing stories about Pierre Lafond's life. And I wanted, like I said, I immediately thought of you, and I wanted to ask you your opinion and what your thoughts are on what Pierre Lafond contributed to Santa Barbara's wine country and the wine business in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like asking, whoever invented basketball, what he created, what he brought to basketball. I mean, Pierre, I think it's probably safe to say that a wine industry would have eventually developed here without Pierre Lafond. But because Pierre Lafond started Santa Barbara Winery way back when, it exploded much quicker than I think it would have without that kind of in the early insight and that early investment in making wine here and making it part of the entire economy of Santa Barbara. And he also was, as we know, one of the first businesses in the in what became the funk zone that was focused on selling things to directly to customers, and was an active winery down there until really just a couple years ago. So not only did he kind of trigger the legacy of winemaking in Santa Barbara County, but he also kind of had the vision to realize that this, at the time, overlooked waterfront neighborhood could actually become a central place for people to gather and have a good time in Santa Barbara. So, I mean, for both of those things, he'll be remembered, I think, very fondly. I'll also say that he brought a level of elegance in the way that he presented himself and treated others with respect. And as a businessman, I think that was an important kind of style to bring to Santa Barbara County, which was a very upstart wine region that had some otherwise kind of punk rock winemakers here, which was great for the region too. But it was also good to have kind of like an elder statesman of elegance in the room too, to be able to have those conversations when they're necessary too.
Hmm. Pierre, when I walk around town or if I talk to anybody through the years, the 30 so years I've been here, and you bring up Pierre's name, he has a bigger than life personality, and there are all sorts of stories about him. I've never heard anything bad, but he is a sharp businessman, and all of the things that you mentioned there, you got a lot of style. But he was legend, and he still is legend in this town for all those things you've mentioned that he's contributed. Have you ever heard of a story, a fantastic story about Pierre um, and your adventures in wine and wine writing and tasting?
You know, I don't have any crazy stories about him, but I do remember one of the times, and I only hung out with him a couple of times, for interviews or this or that. And I do remember the one time that I did a more extensive interview with him, probably based on some anniversary for Santa Barbara Winery. I met with him and his longtime winemaker Bruce McGuire, and I think his daughter Michelle may have been there. And we sat down, and he was pretty much down to business. He was like, "All right, what do we need to talk about?" Not that he was rude or even curt or anything like that, but it was very much like, I'm busy guy. What do you need from us? Let's get through this. I'm happy to tell the story. I have it all, I have it all here. But he was much more, down to business. He wasn't, a lot of winemakers I know are way more kind of, I guess, creative minded, way more free flowing. And Pierre was more like, I'm here. Let's get this done and move on with the rest of the day. So he clearly was a very busy guy, way into his career, and I respect that. I don't have time to waste either. So let's get it done and
Yeah.
move on. So it was cool to see him like that because I didn't really know what to expect. So
But yeah, for those that are just tuning in that don't know Pierre, that don't, from around the world that are listening, Pierre Lafond not only had, wasn't it the first real winery in Santa Barbara? Do you know if that's true? I've heard
I
that.
believe that's I believe true. I mean, it goes back to the early 60s.
Yeah.
I think
It's like,
64 he started making wine down in the Funk Zone. So there were some vineyards that were being planted right around that same time. Most of those grapes were being shipped off elsewhere. So and in the early days, I do believe like a lot of the wines were actually like fruit wines, like boysenberry wine or whatever, and then they moved
mm,
more slowly into actual grape wines. But by 1972, they were planning out in the Santa Rita Hills, which was at that time completely untapped, aside from the Sanford and Benedict planting that was just like a year old at that time. So that has become one of the most important wine regions really in the world, not just Santa Barbara County. And they were early adopters to that game too, which is pretty
yeah,
impressive.
which is just, yeah, super impressive. And then uh more followed and more winemakers. It's one of the best wine regions in the world, I think, Santa Barbara County and Santa Ynez. But then, and so he was a trailblazer there. He ran markets. He ran, cafes. His wife is Wendy Foster, the iconic fashion designer, in the fashion world. I mentioned Wendy's name to any women, and they all just go, "Oh my God, I love Wendy Foster." Um, so they're this power couple, and very busy. So I can see that's a good story. You sat down. He's like, "Let's just get to it." Didn't waste any
Yeah.
time. Do you have a favorite vintage or a wine by Pierre LaFond or the winery?
I've tasted so many of the vintage. I've been reviewing their wines for over a decade now, and tasting them even another decade beyond that. I think what's really special about Santa Barbara Winery's wines, particularly their Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, is that they really represent what what Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are like from Santa Barbara County. So they are kind of emblematic of the region just by the being named Santa Barbara Winery and having iconic Santa Barbara scenes on their labels. But their wines are also very representative of what you can expect from wines here, and that's especially true. And actually, some of their lower price, kind of their entry level wines, which are really over deliver and are really excellent for the price, but also are very typical of what you'll find, kind of the hallmarks of flavor you get from wines here. And I think that's always been a special situation for Santa Barbara Winery, and it's always why we're still excited. My wife and I are still excited to give away bottles of Santa Barbara Winery when people come to visit. It's kind of like it's your welcome
Right.
gift, because it says the name on it, and it's actually a typical. It's not a bad wine. It's a typical wine from the region too. So I think it's anyone that can have a consistently good and wine that's actually representative of what the region actually tastes like is an important part of the entire picture. So
That is true, and the name was so important. Years ago I ran the Enterprise Fish Company, and we poured cases and cases of Santa Barbara wines, and people would always ask just for that bottle. They would take that Chardonnay bottle home, as a souvenir from Santa Barbara because it had such a beautiful label and had Santa Barbara on it.
yeah,
I definitely
totally.
relate to that. Well, Matt, you've spent your life writing about wine, tasting wine, exploring wine with some of the best winemakers in the world, and you continue to do so. You just told me, how many did you review today that were due?
Oh, I only
Nine?
tasted about 12, but I had about 200 that I had to write in the last couple of days because it's the end of the month and that's when these things are due. So I pile up all of the notes and then I do them all. I procrastinate until the very end of the month and do them all in a
Well,
burst.
what drew you to wine and writing about wine aside from the obvious? What is so why does it call out to you so much? What's so special about it? And you just write about it beautifully, by the way. So
Um, I mean, I've always been drawn more to the people and the places than the wines. I mean, obviously, I love wine, but I've been drawn more to the people and the places and the history and the stories, and the window it really gives into everything from history to geography to geology to connections between farming and food production and all of that. I mean, that's always been more interesting to me than any other part of it. And it's a language that you can speak kind of almost anywhere you go in the world at this point. Even in regions that don't grow grapes or make wine, they usually have wine shops and restaurants that serve wine. So it's a language that really kind of translates across the world. And then you also find that people that are involved in wine tend to be involved in the other stuff I'm interested in, whether that's farming of other crops or food and travel and, just general adventuring through life. You find a lot of that in the wine business. So there's a lot of cool people involved, and it always stays interesting. So when I hang out with winemakers, we obviously talk about wine a good amount, but we also talk about a lot of other things too, including science and biology and other
Yeah.
fermentations and all sorts of stuff. So it's kind of an open lens into a lot of other parts of the world. And I think you'll find a lot of winemakers will answer similarly, that it's not just the wine that drew them in, it was the culture, it was everything else that goes along with it. So that's
Yeah.
definitely what keeps me interested. Not reviewing 200 wines, not writing 200 wine reviews in 12 hours. That's not fun at all. So
Well, I talked to you about this off air before he came on and asked your permission if I could ask this question. And I was thinking about you, and I was thinking about Pierre and this conversation that we were about to have and earlier today. And I thought, you have contributed to the wine world through your writing and sharing, and Pierre contributed to the wine world in his way. And I'm not sure how he will be remembered. I think different people will remember in different ways how he affected them. But he's definitely made his mark on the wine world here, not only in California, Santa Barbara, but the world. And you have as well, Matt. And I was thinking, how would have you thought about how, you'd like to be remembered, when that hopefully a lot for a long time comes. But when you're remembered, is wine a part of that? Do you see wine as something that was you? When people remember you, they remember the wine story.
I mean, I hope they remember me just as a friendly guy who was supportive of what they were up to, and kind of had camaraderie with the sort of things that they were looking, to promote and to do, and all of that. I mean, I think I'm a reliable person, so that's always good, and someone they can count on to help them out. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like to think of myself as a storyteller more than anything else. So if people remember me as someone who unearthed and told cool stories about people in the wine business or in the food business or in any business. I mean, I think that's what I'm doing. So hopefully that's what I'm cool with being remembered as, because otherwise I'm doing the wrong thing. So
Well, speaking of sharing stories, then share if you could, a really memorable moment of you with someone else sharing a great glass of bottle of wine. You probably have a hundred and more interesting stories, but what sticks out to you? Do you have a really interesting story that had wine as the common denominator between the two, you
I
and the
mean,
guest?
I had a day in Spain years ago. I was with I think we were married. I mean, just my wife now. I think we were married then too. But where we kind of saw the whole world of wine in three winery visits, right? So the first one, we went to this old dusty place that was, very buttoned up and classic, and it was essentially this old French family that had come over the mountains and recreated their winery in Spain, and that was kind of one style of wine and one kind of style of just winery. And then we went to this place that was like, it was like a Frank Gehry building, with like robots making the wine, and you couldn't take pictures inside because there were robots that were making the wine, and a huge tasting room that had all of these like crazy light panels for everybody, and everyone had their own sink, and it was like high technology, and all these wines were good. The first wines were good, the second wines were good, and then we went to the third place, which was like a father, son, and wife, pouring their wines for us at their kitchen table, letting me hold their family sword, and proud that their wine was like €5, because it was delicious and cheap. And I was like, wow, this is like the world of wine in one day of touring. You saw the old school way, you see the super new school way, and you just see this family run way. And honestly, the family run one was my favorite, by the end of the day. Although that was the end of the day, so we'd already had a lot of wine at that point. But it did seem like kind of the most earnest and earnest winery that was doing it for kind of all the right reasons. So anyway, so there was a fun wine day.
What a great story. That's a good story. I like that. The family way. That's always the best. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your thoughts on Pierre LaFond and joining us in this special episode, paying tribute to his contributions to the wine world and life in general. Matt Kettmann, the Santa Barbara Independent senior writer. He's also a critic at Wine Enthusiast Magazine. He's also the writer at large, which I think is the best title for a guy who's writing about wine.
It's not
Writer at
bad. Yeah.
large. That sounds very mysterious, and find me if you can. Matt,
Yeah.
thanks so much. Follow Matt on Instagram. I'm going to spell it for you because we got a lot of T's and a lot of N's. We got Matt, Matt, Kettmann, Kettmann on Instagram. And check out, just Google him. There's a lot of great articles out there, a lot of great stories by Matt Kettmann. And Matt, thanks again so much. It's always good to see you, my friend, and it's nice to hear your stories.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Cheers to Pierre.
Here's to Pierre. That's a good way to go. Thank you.